Hello, friends and fellow lovers of all things beachy. Welcome to The Beach Speaks, the podcast that shares stories about the beach and our connection to it. I'm your host and beach lover, Paige Friend, helping you reconnect with the beach, return to your soul, and reimagine your life. So grab a cool drink, relax in your beach chair, stick your toes in the sand, and enjoy this episode of The Beach Speaks. Hey, beach lover. Well, here I am again talking about hurricanes. You might recall in my last episode, I talked about Hurricane Helene and holding on to our anchors in the storm and how we build back after that. Now it's Milton, and why in the path of a hurricane we Floridians choose to stay. But before I go into all things hurricanes, can we talk about food? It's been a month since we returned from Italy, and I can't stop thinking about the amazing food. But I'm an average cook at best. I need a little inspiration to tackle something more than just plain spaghetti and meatballs. And you know what? There's a podcast for that. It's called Free Kitchens. Here are the hosts Heather and Aaron to tell you all about it. Buon appetito!
Are you tired of cooking the same old things? So are we. Come join us at Three Kitchens Podcast and get inspired to cook something new. We share our experiences cooking new recipes and have great conversations with amazing guests from the food community.
Whether you enjoy cooking or just like good food, join your favorite home cooks every Tuesday on Three Kitchens Podcast and get inspired to make great food.
I couldn't stop eating it.
So yummy. I ate like that whole bowl.
The day after I published the episode about Helene, we went into post-hurricane cleanup mode. We loaded Ernie's chainsaw and a 40-pound toolbox in my 2011 Mercedes 300 named Karma and drove 3.5 hours to our friend Ella's farm outside of Tampa, where she, along with her 3 horses, a miniature donkey, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a handful of chickens, had hunkered down and waited for the storm to pass. Fortunately, they all made it through safe and sound, but there were a lot of trees down, and folks in the neighborhood had helped to get the majority of the damage cleared up, but there was still a lot to do. Ernie spent several hours repairing a broken pipe that had been leaking water in the house, and then cut up a 12-foot tree trunk that had fallen in the middle of the paddock where the horses were grazing. I loaded the branches and chunks of wood into the back of the gator, making several trips to add to the tall pile of tree debris along the fence line. I also pulled weeds that had completely taken over her vegetable garden, collecting several loads into a wheelbarrow and dumping them on the 6-foot wide smoldering fire pit in the far corner of the backyard. It was hard work in the Florida heat, and my muscles ached like I had just completed a 4-hour boot camp class. Who needs a gym? All you need is a farm and a hurricane. But seriously, I have no complaints. It was nothing like what our friends in the Tampa Bay and the St. Pete Beach area were dealing with. Hundreds of thousands of residents were out of electricity, and people were exhausted from working 24/7, gutting their homes, stacking huge piles of waterlogged furniture, torn up appliances, and soggy drywall. You could already see the dangerous mold forming on the debris. People barely had time to catch their breath and wrap their brains around what had just happened when the news of another hurricane, even stronger, was churning in the Gulf. Milton, a Cat 5 with 150-mile-per-hour winds, was expected to land in Tampa and then sweep across the center of the state through Orlando and then northeast toward our side of the state. It was Monday, and Milton was predicted to land late Wednesday night or early Thursday morning. Even the calmest weather reporters were beginning to panic. We could have stayed another day in Tampa, but I couldn't wait to pack up the car and get on the road to beat the traffic. There were already lines at the gas pumps. I just wanted to be home, at the beach. I was most concerned about being home for our kids and grandkids. We live within minutes of each other, and it felt comforting to be close by. We had backup power for our granddaughter's medical equipment, food, water, flashlights, everything we needed to hunker down and ride out the storm, like we always do. I wasn't worried about our safety, but I did worry about the beach. The ocean can be unpredictable, and the surf was really churning up. I noticed some people new to the beach community here posting questions on the neighborhood Facebook page like, "This is my first time in a hurricane. When do I leave?" And the majority of the responses were, "You don't." My friend Jen Hardy of The Jen Hardy Show and my podcast bestie lives a little further south on the Atlantic side of Florida on a barrier island. Many of you might recall the episode I did with Jen where we talked about how she moved her family from Tennessee to this island after being told she had 1 year to live. That was several years ago, and she's still very much alive. I asked her if they were going to evacuate, and she said they weren't expected to be in harm's way, so while other times they would take the opportunity and go inland for a hurricane, this time they decided to stay. Jen has an amazing YouTube channel and was broadcasting live throughout the storm. Here's what she said about choosing to stay.
For those of you who wonder, why in the world do people stay home during a hurricane? This doesn't make any sense. Well, I thought I would answer all of your questions. So the reason that we are here is because we really thought this was going to be a tropical storm and we're going to be fine. But by the time we realized, hey, this is a little more intense than we thought it was going to be, traffic on the roads is so congested that we would be in our car on the side of a road during a hurricane. Now, our home was built to withstand these things. We are in a neighborhood that was built back in the day for the original workers at NASA. They are built with thick concrete. Our roof is relatively new and actually is bolted into the ground, able to withstand winds of hundreds of miles per hour. So if it's a choice of being in a car somewhere else or being in my home, I'll take being in my home. Now, what if the water comes? That's a whole other thing. So we have these really cool things. Instead of sandbags, we have their dams and their long strips of material. And inside, the only way I can explain it is what's in a diaper, right? So these things, they have like what's inside a diaper. So, like a diaper is little, and then when it gets wet, it expands. Well, that's what these dams are like. So it utilizes the water that comes through, and then they swell up, sealing off the gap. So outside the garage door, outside the lanai door, that sort of thing. We actually don't have it outside our front door because, if you can see, we're up a little bit from the street. And if we need them, we do have them. We've made a pretty serious investment. I've got friends in Tampa that are apparently having some serious issues. And I've got some friends in Jacksonville. I've got some, all over Florida. I don't know what it is with YouTubers and podcasters, but a lot of us are in Florida. Anyway, we thought it was going to be less than it is, but we're here. So we've got these dams and they work really well. We have a generator, and so we can power things in our house. We've got enough gas. We can go for about 2 weeks. We have a pool that we can filter the water if we had to for a very long time, and a Berkey that filters water really well, which is very helpful. We also have boxes of, those food, those like prepper food, So yeah, we thought we'd come out while it was pouring down and it would be really cool backdrop, but I don't think it's even raining at this point. It's going to. So we're in the outer bands of a hurricane. What is it like? That's what everyone keeps asking. And why would you go? Why would you stay? Like I said, we didn't think it would be that bad. And, it's like some pretty decent family time. So we're here and we have everything that we need.
Now, back on the Gulf Coast, Milton was gaining strength by the hour, and he was really going to pack a punch with high winds, more catastrophic flooding, and a record number of residents, especially in the evacuation zones, packed up and left. But many stayed. It's what Floridians do, especially if you've lived through a lot of hurricanes. I was told that if you were born and raised in Florida, chances are you were taught not to leave. Just get prepared, hunker down, and ride it out. Now, this is interesting because as I was preparing for this episode, an article from the New Yorker magazine popped up in my newsfeed. It was written by Carolyn Corman titled, "The Relentlessness of Florida Hurricane Season." I thought I'd share a portion of it with you, and if you want to read the entire article, I'll post a link in the show notes. Carolyn writes, Floridians are accustomed to hurricanes, weary of storms to the point that many are relatively nonchalant about a big storm's approach. Some even ignore mandatory evacuation orders. Mayor of Tampa, Jane Castor, delivered a stern warning Monday evening. Helene was a wake-up call, she said. This is literally catastrophic, and I can say without any dramatization whatsoever, if you choose to stay in one of those evacuation areas, you're going to die. In South Tampa, retired Army Colonel Norm Allen was in the process of updating his will. He designated beneficiaries for various accounts, and on Wednesday he put the will in a plastic bag and wrapped it with yarn, an idea his brother gave him, so it wouldn't appear to be trash. If things don't work out, I want somebody to find it, he told me. Allen, who is 65, had decided to ride out the storm in his house, a one-story bungalow in the Palmacia neighborhood, with green and white striped awnings over the front windows, and a large American flag waving above the front steps. Allen's house is 18 feet above sea level. He was not concerned about storm surge, but he was wary of the rain and the wind. My biggest fear is the trees, he said. His yard didn't have any, but all of his neighbors did. I've had plenty of people question my judgment here, he said, but I'm an Army guy. I've been around the world on a number of battlefields in places where rounds and rockets are coming in on us. I've flown through dangerous areas in military aircraft. Allen and his dog Rhett, an 8-year-old English setter, was going to shelter in a narrow interior hallway where he had placed a pallet covered in quilts. That ought to be safe, except for that big tree outside, he said. The hurricane's landfall was 4 hours away. He sounded calm, almost cheerful. If that tree came down, it could break through the roof over the hallway where he would be sheltering. So I'm prepared to pull out a mattress and pull it over me, he said. He'd also moved his tools, his chainsaw, his axe, inside the house. He had filled the bathtub with water. The county had shut off the water earlier. Froze more water and put it in a cooler and sedated Rhett. He was trying to avoid checking the news too often. You also make sure you have a little bourbon or something, he said. He would keep his yarn-wrapped will nearby. You have to be smart, right? He said, I'm a little older now. I've lived a full life. The article continues. Far more people evacuated, heeding official orders and pleas. Stuart McDonald and his wife Lori did not. They live on St. Pete Beach, one of Tampa Bay's barrier islands, all of which were under mandatory evacuation orders. If the kids were here, McDonald, a financial advisor, told me, we would have left. But their kids were in Tallahassee, where they both attended Florida State University. McDonald, who had grown up in Florida and was accustomed to hurricanes, as a teenager, he said, a hurricane meant bringing a cooler of beer to the beach to party, and who had never evacuated for a hurricane before, decided to stay. The McDonalds sipped the best tequila they had. They saw no storm surge, but the rain was relentless, swirling up and sideways. Water started coming in through the windows and the doors because of the ferocious wind, and they tried to sop it up with towels. By 10:30 p.m., the wind and the rain seemed only half as bad as they had earlier. The worst was over. Would we do this again? Staying versus leaving? McDonald wrote in a text. I know this sounds crazy, but yes, we would stay. Fortunately, as Milton made landfall, Tampa was spared the catastrophic flooding that had been predicted, but there was still a lot of wind, so strong that it tore the roof off Tropicana Field, and millions across the coast were left without power. The storm had moved south of Tampa, devastating beach communities like Sarasota and Siesta Key, places that were just beginning to rebuild after Ian hit 2 years ago. I was glued to the Weather Channel, watching the reporters trying to stand upright in the 100-plus mile-per-hour coastal wind, downing trees and flipping boats the size of yachts into people's front yards. By the time Milton reached our side of the state, there was a lot of wind, and the surf was really rough. We were just on the edge of the outer bands before the storm turned south and headed back into the ocean. Once again, we escaped the worst of it. What is it about a place that makes you want to stay, despite the challenges? What do you think? Send a message or an email. The Beach and I love to hear from you. And by the way, did you know that you can send a text directly to the show? All you need to do is scroll to the top of the show notes, click where it says send a text. It's easy and free. The Beach is speaking. Are you listening? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Beach Speaks. If you enjoyed what you heard, please spread the beachy vibes and share it with a friend. Because, let's be honest, who doesn't want more beach in their lives? And if more beach is what you crave, go to thebeachspeaks.com and sign up for my newsletter. It's an easy way to stay in the know, collect some tips and travel hacks for your next beach adventure, and find out what I'm doing at the beach. And if you want to dive deeper into the ocean of support, consider becoming a Beach Speaks Patreon member. Your contribution helps keep the podcast afloat, and you'll enjoy some cool perks that only our Patreon family gets to enjoy. The Beach is speaking. Are you listening?